Well, welcome to the 700 Club. You remember the guy who said, never let a crisis go wasted? Well, they're trying to do something and change this nation. It is a power grab of massive proportion. Here's what the Democrats are planning, and they're doing it fast. Passage of Voting Rights Act, which federalizes elections, takes away power of state legislatures, permits unsupervised and unlimited mail-in ballots, and allows ballot harvesting. Next, they want to do elimination of the Senate filibuster, which denies effective power to the minority. In a 50-50 Senate, Vice President Kamala Harris becomes a deciding voice. They next want to give statehood to D.C. and Puerto Rico, which permits the election of 4 new Democrat senators. Then they want to do Supreme Court packing with 4 new liberal justices, which would destroy the independence of the judiciary. And under the guise of what is called infrastructure, they want to allocate tens of billions of dollars to liberal groups throughout America. And then they want to give citizenship to millions of undocumented aliens who they hope will be Democrat voters. And finally, they want to permit government by executive fiat. We've already seen that in the Keystone Pipeline ruling. That's what is being planned for you and our country unless we do something about it. Now, you say it's shocking, but they want to put it all together. They want to get it through fast before the American people wake up. And I feel like Paul Revere, like the British are coming. You better get awake and get big, or you will lose your government.
What do people do?
Well, the big thing is they can sure pray for Joe Manchin, because he and Sistema from Arizona are the only 2 in the Senate to hold the line in terms of the filibuster. That is a major thing. The rest of the stuff, if they pass that voting rights, it sounds so simple, a Voting Rights Act, but it's going to give federalized elections and take power that the Constitution gives to state legislatures. They want to rewrite the Constitution. If the Senate goes, if the filibuster goes, this country's had it. It's just that simple. And they're like, they let the little boy with his finger in the dike. There are only about 2 people, and Joe Manchin is one of them.
So pray. Call your representatives.
Yeah, call every one of them and let them know that the game is out. You know what they're doing. Call your congressman, call your senator, and say, listen, we see what's being done. We get the game that they're playing, and we do not want to give our country over to one-party rule for the rest of our lives. Well, in other news, half of all adults in the U.S. have received at least 1 COVID-19 shot. So what about the rest? Who's reluctant to get vaccinated and why? And what can be done to convince them it's safe? Dale Hurd has that.
Half of American adults have now received at least 1 dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, and almost a third are now fully vaccinated. This comes as Johns Hopkins University says 3 million people worldwide have now died from the disease. The number of people in the U.S. willing to take the shots is increasing. A new poll shows 75% of Americans say they'll get vaccinated, up from 67% in January. However, a significant number of Americans across racial lines say they probably or definitely won't get the shot, including 26% of white Americans, 24% of African Americans, and 22% of Hispanic Americans. And a poll last week found that almost half of Republicans do not plan to get vaccinated, while 2/3 of Democrats have already received at least 1 vaccine dose. Now, White House Chief Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci says people who have already been vaccinated may need to get booster shots, and an annual vaccine may be needed, similar to the seasonal flu shot.
I believe by the time we get to the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall, we'll have a pretty good idea whether we definitely or not need to give people boosts and when we need to give it to them.
Every state has now expanded vaccine eligibility to all people 16 and older, and Pfizer has begun testing its vaccine on children as young as 6 months old. This California couple's 7-month-old son will take part in the trial this week.
When we weigh the risks of getting the vaccine versus the virus, it's clear it's do the vaccine.
Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson's single-shot vaccine is still on hold after 6 women suffered severe blood clots. That's out of 7 million vaccinations. Fauci says he expects the pause to be lifted this week, possibly with new restrictions.
Not sure what that will be, whether they'll be age or sex, or whether they'll just come back with a warning of some sort.
The White House is launching a media blitz today to get out the word that vaccines are available for everyone over 16, especially in minority communities. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Thanks, Dave. Well, CBN medical reporter Laurie Johnson is here for more on those vaccines. Laurie, is this J&J vaccine suspension just an overreaction?
A lot of health experts say it absolutely is an overreaction because when you think about it, the chance of having one of these types of blood clots is close to 0, Pat. You know, people say, oh, it's a 1 in a million chance. This is actually more rare than that. We're talking about 6 cases out of 7 million people. And when you talk about the deaths, we're talking 1 out of 7 million, which is actually a very good safety record. It's better than the safety record for a lot of our other popular medications, including penicillin and Tylenol. So the big takeaway, Pat, is if you're worried about blood clots, you have a 10 times greater chance of having a serious, maybe even deadly blood clot if you get COVID-19. This is something we've been talking about for the last year. So it's still very rare, and blood clots are a very often serious and deadly complication from getting the COVID-19 virus.
I'll give my personal thing. I had the J&J vaccine. I have had not one twinge of problem. There was no pain at the place they made the injection. I've had no ill effects whatsoever. I mean, not even the slightest headache, nothing. So I'm a great fan of that one-shot deal. So well, how close do you think we are to the so-called tipping point where we can say, okay, we've got victory over the pandemic?
Well, Pat, first I would like to say thank you so much for your testimonial about the J&J vaccine. I'm sure you're going to influence a lot of people and may save lives in the process. And I would just like to add to that, I am also fully vaccinated. I had the Pfizer shots, and I also didn't have any side effects whatsoever. But to get back to your question about when are we going to finally be finished with this pandemic, well, I'd like to say that once you're fully vaccinated, you kind of are finished. You can sort of go about life as usual. But as far as the nation, when are we going to be finished? The health experts say right now we still have too many new cases. We're averaging about 67,000 new cases per day. That's even higher than the 50,000 we saw this time last month. And that's because of those new highly contagious variants. We know that the goal is less than where we are now, but the goal is not 0. The question is, what is that number? Last week, Congressman Jim Jordan grilled Anthony Fauci. What is the goal? Where's the finish line? Is it 10,000 new cases a day? Is it 5,000 new cases a day? And Fauci wouldn't say. He basically said, we'll know it when we see it.
Laurie, well, one last thing. If you've had the vaccine, do you still have to go around with a mask? I understand it takes about 3 weeks, 4 weeks or something for it to take hold, and then do you then have to wear a mask, or what's the protocol?
Well, the protocol is 2 weeks after your last shot. So in your case, you only had the one and only shot. I had 2 shots. So it's 2 weeks after your last shot, and you are fully vaccinated, and you can basically go about business. Now, whether you have to wear a mask or socially distance, that's very controversial. The CDC said that there's no evidence that shows that you can transmit it to other people. But other people, such as Anthony Fauci, say there's a study going on. The results will come out in about 4 months that will say definitively whether vaccinated people have the ability to transmit the virus. So it's sort of a judgment call.
It's an amazing thing that socially distanced 6 feet, that I understand is from a dead Italian. And it's only 3 feet, and it's not 6, but we've got 6 all over the country. Am I right there?
Well, we'll certainly learn. It's going to be fascinating to see in the years after this pandemic, to look back and see where we got it right and where we got it wrong, and learn from those mistakes, because God forbid we may be facing another pandemic one of these days.
Laurie, thank you so much. Thanks for your insight. Well, in other news, ladies and gentlemen, closer than ever to creating weapon-grade uranium. That's what Iran is now claiming. despite the sabotage against one of its key nuclear facilities in Natanz. Ephraim Graham has more.
Pat, Iran is increasing its uranium enrichment after accusing Israel of sabotaging its main nuclear facility last week. Iranian President Hassan Rouhani vowing they can go to 90% weapons-grade uranium anytime they want to, although the 2015 Iran nuclear agreement restricts enrichment to less than 4%.
Iranian decision to start increasing uranium to 60% is disturbing. It is, I think, a signal to Israel and to the world powers that it is not going to be deterred by attacks on its nuclear facilities. Iran is trying to increase its leverage in the talks in Vienna.
We will do whatever it takes to prevent this extremity to success, and definitely we will prevent this regime from having nuclear weapons.
Meanwhile, in Vienna, Iran and the five powers who signed the original nuclear agreement reportedly are ready to begin writing a draft of a new agreement. Israel's diplomatic security cabinet met Sunday. They're concerned the Biden administration wants a nuclear deal at all costs. Here at home, the Biden administration is falling short of its campaign pledge to admit more refugees into the country. Friday, President Biden signed an executive order speeding up refugee admission, but keeping in place President Donald Trump's cap of 15,000. That's far short of his promise to admit some 62,000 refugees this year. Following an outcry from some Democrats, the administration promised it will allow more refugees into the country. However, on ABC's This Week, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken accused the Trump administration of dismantling the system and said it's unlikely they'll reach their goal.
Based on what we've now seen from in terms of the inheritance and being able to look at what was in place, what we could put in place, how quickly we could put it in place, it's going to be very hard to meet the 62,000 this fiscal year.
Saturday, President Biden told reporters the flood of migrants on the southern border is to blame for the lack of resources to help refugees. The president calling that situation a crisis for the first time. Pat, back to you.
You know, it's amazing, isn't it, that they shifted the goal. They have opened the doors. They said it wasn't a crisis. Now it's a crisis. And, you know, every time you look at Biden, you know, when he was in the Senate, you could see he was clear. His face was open. His eyes were open. Now, every time you see him, his eyes are squinting, which tells me he's reading from a script almost every time he talks, that somebody is writing what he says. And it also shows in this change that the squad, that group of extreme left-wingers in the House, is calling the shots. And when they don't like what he does, then he shifts gears. And I just think it's a dangerous situation to have the President of the United States kind of a pawn to a group of left-wing sort of fanatics. And the fact that it seems like everything that he says is scripted and he's reading it. When he did that press conference, he was reading everything that he said. And it's just, there's something wrong. And one wishes that the president was as strong as he could be, because we need strong leadership in this country. Ephraim?
Pat, when it comes to religious freedom, there's no question Saudi Arabia has a long way to go, but it's also true few countries can boast the type of change happening in that kingdom today. Jennifer Wishaw explains.
Christmas trees, even talk of a future Christian church? No, this isn't a fantasy. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is making and considering changes once thought impossible.
The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is incrementally moving in the right direction.
Johnny Moore, who sits on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, never thought religious liberty in Saudi Arabia was possible. Now he thinks it's inevitable. It's still illegal for Christians to worship publicly, but in recent years, the kingdom's religious police have eased off raiding worship services.
I would love one day, to celebrate Christmas on the Arabian Peninsula. And this year, by the way, they allowed Christmas trees, in the kingdom. And increasingly, the rumors that Saudi Arabia might actually consider having a Christian church, in the kingdom in some capacity. At this point, these are all rumors. but the very fact that they are rumors is significant.
Especially in light of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's aim to reform the kingdom's judicial system, Sharia law based on a strict interpretation of the Quran, one that's not tolerant of other faiths.
Is this a pretty big deal?
For the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia to say, no, we're going to have laws like the rest of the world, and we're going to put those laws down on paper. I mean, this is an astonishing reform.
Watchdog groups also point to improvements in the kingdom's school textbooks, removing some hateful references to Jews, Christians, and others.
Increasingly, we're seeing strong leadership throughout the Arab world that is pushing back on extremism and saying it's not enough to stop the extremist. The real way of stopping extremism is raising a generation that doesn't have to fear those who worship differently.
Incremental moves that may one day lead to Muslims, Christians, and Jews coexisting on the Arabian Peninsula. Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Significant changes indeed. Pat?
You know, in the early days of Saudi Arabia, the fanatical group, the Wahhabis, were the most ardent fundamentalist Islamics in the world, probably, and they backed King Ibn Saud when he rose to power. And so there was a deal between these people that they handled the religion and Saud handled the government. And that's been going on for centuries. But what's happening now is there's a new breeze going through, and especially with the Abraham Accords, where the Emirates and Qatar and other states in the Middle East have joined with Israel in a new, concordance, and they are setting the pace. And it looks like Saudi Arabia is going to come in and make peace with Israel, which they should do. And once that happens, you've got the wealth of Israel, of Saudi Arabia, coupled with the entrepreneurial spirit of the Jews, and the two will be a powerhouse. And it looks like that's the fulfillment of prophecy, so it's a good thing. But the Wahhabi influence apparently is diminishing, and this new prince says, no, we want a new day, because we've got to make peace with Israel. And the Abraham Accords that were put together under the auspices of President Trump are very, very significant. And if Saudi comes in and makes peace with Israel, it's a great thing. So we'll all say to that, hallelujah.